I mean, what would the Sopranos be without gabagool?
Let's get back to that gabagool.
Gabagool. Gabagool.
Gabagool.
Gabagool.
Gabagool.
Gabagool.
Gabagool.
This sounds very gay.
When you ask people what the best TV show of all time is, they'll often tell you Breaking Bad or The Sopranos.
Shut the fuck up.
Now, there's a million video essays out there about The Sopranos paving the way for the anti-hero and changing what a television program could be and all that, but you've already seen the title to this video, so you know I won't talk about that. For me, a large part of what makes the show great is that it's from somewhere.
What the fuck's he talking about?
Put it like this. The show could not be set anywhere else than New Jersey. I mean, imagine if The Sopranos took place in, I don't know, the north of England. While that could be very entertaining in itself, the point remains it would not be The Sopranos. Whereas, for instance, Breaking Bad was only set in Albuquerque because filming in LA would have been too expensive, the setting is essential to The Sopranos. The show's identity is inherently tied to where the characters are from, and more specifically to how they speak as well. It's steeped in references to the mob movie genre and Italian-American culture, of which it became a huge symbol in itself. In this video, we'll explore what makes language interesting in The Sopranos, starting with the linguistic history of Italian Americans. So alright, we get it. The Sopranos is from somewhere. But where are the Sopranos from?
I thought we were knobbly dobbly or whatever.
Napolitan.
A majority of Italian Americans are of southern Italian origin. In particular, the Soprano family is from the town of Avellino, near Naples in Campania. The first Sopranos to emigrate to America would have spoken a variety of the Neapolitan language. Italy is a young nation-state, and its linguistic situation is very complex. It's common and perhaps useful to think of Italy as a country where Italian is the native language, with a few regional varieties of this language existing alongside it. And while this is increasingly true, as younger speakers often don't learn to speak their regional language, in 2006, only 46% of Italians were monolingual Italian speakers, while 49% of them spoke both Italian and one of the regional autochthonous languages of Italy. But how come these aren't just dialects of Italian? What makes them languages? Well, to understand that will require a lot of big words, and some maps. The Romance languages are all descended from Latin. As Latin diverged into these languages, it didn't neatly divide itself into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese and Romanian, and then into different dialects. Instead, town to town and region to region, the variety of local Latin would remain relatively similar. But as you travelled further along the dialect continuum, as linguists call it, you would be less and less able to understand what people were saying as small differences accumulated across distance. A map of the natively spoken Romance languages looks more like this. It wasn't until much later that national standard varieties of a language were propagated by different governments. Parisian French, Castilian Spanish, and Tuscan Italian all came to be the exclusive language of government, education, and often employment in their respective countries, displacing the native languages from a position of status and economic utility. For instance, Neapolitan and Venetian are not dialects of Italian because Standard Italian is just another language that evolved alongside them from Latin. They both had been the de facto languages of the Venetian Republic and the Kingdom of Naples, and have long literary histories to themselves. Prior to the establishment of the Kingdom of Italy in the 19th century, the language that would eventually come to be known as Italian, namely Tuscan, was spoken only in its home region of Tuscany, and by a very small elite outside of it, totaling about 2.5% of the country's population. Standard Italian has taken on a life of its own nowadays, having no real geographical centre. It's said in fact that the best Italian spoken is lingua toscana in bocca romana. Actors, voice actors, newsreaders, etc. all downplay their regional accents in something similar to BBC English. While what we said earlier is true, that nearly half of Italians can speak a regional language, in 2014, ISTAT found that only 9% of the population aged 18 to 74 used a regional language frequently with their close family and friends, while fewer than 2% spoke one with strangers. There has been nothing short of a rapid decline of these languages. Perhaps ironically, the exact same thing happened across the Atlantic among Italian-American immigrants, for quite similar reasons. Whether it be versus English or Standard Italian, the dialects are simply not the languages of economic or social utility. The same ISTAT report indicates a clear correlation between living in rural areas, being older and being less educated, and the likelihood of speaking dialect. The fact is, I dialetti have socio-linguistic associations in Italy of lower social status, which clearly contributes to their decline. On top of that, in the popular imagination, they are associated with famous criminal subcultures, like that depicted in The Sopranos. Social aspiration has always motivated linguistic change, and whether rightly or wrongly, people do make judgments about others based on how they speak. For this same reason, people often vary their speech depending on whom they're talking to. As we looked at last time, this is called diglossia, when people's speech exists on a spectrum between a standard variety of a language and a dialect or another language altogether. This has resulted in varieties and accents of Standard Italian that exist throughout Italy alongside the regional languages.
Yes, signor.
Can I just get some macaroni and gravy?
Ma che cos'è questo gravy?
Paolo, he doesn't know what you say. You mean grapes, uva.
Gravy, tomato sauce.
Ah, isso va a pasta capumarola. Non gli piace questo.
E poi dicono che i tedeschi non danno una classe su pizza in mezzo.
Scusate, signor.
A more standard Italian speaker would say scusi, but here the waiter uses the second person plural form. This voi form is used as a formal address in the south of Italy, where elsewhere, to be polite, people use the pronoun lei and the third person singular form of verbs, although both of these might be seen as overly formal nowadays depending on the context. He also says scusate instead of scusate.
Scusate, signor.
The waiter is speaking Italian and not Neapolitan, but his accent and choice of words are very particular to where he comes from. This scene showcases so much of what is great about language in The Sopranos. Not only did they go the extra mile in terms of the authenticity of how the Neapolitan characters speak, but language is used very effectively in this scene to communicate the cultural disconnect between them and Paulie. Furio Giunta Furio Giunta is the most prominent Neapolitan-speaking character in the show, saying lines such as
Non ti preoccupare.
In Standard Italian, the phrase would be non ti preoccupare. Often the infinitive form of the verb, the are, has its last syllable cut off in Southern Italian dialects and accents, especially in Rome as well. The stress stays on the final vowel, in this case the a, which helps distinguish it from the third person singular. He, she worries. So you have preoccupa, and for the reduced infinitive, preoccupa. I love it. It's like the ghost of the infinitive is still sort of there because of the stress. It's really cool.
Yeah? And what about back over fucking New Jersey over here? Hey, yo.
What the hell?
This scene shows Dominic Chianese as Uncle Junior singing the Neapolitan song Cora Ngrato, the music of which was written by Salvatore Cardillo, who came to the United States in 1903. It's the only well-known Neapolitan language song to have been written in America. Chianese's own father moved to New York City from Naples 1 year after Cardillo did. In the scene, we see the older generation who, like Chianese and presumably Uncle Junior, were the children of first-generation speakers, to both understand the song better and feel more affected by it.
What's that mean, cuore ingrato? Ungrateful heart.
There's a clear generational divide on display here regarding levels of removal from Italy. These songs would have been sung and learned in the households of the first to leave the old country. This, and not standard Italian, which the first generation often didn't speak at all, is the language that echoes in the speech of their descendants. Now, you may be thinking,
Oh, Mr. Mikey Linseed Bread over here. What's with all the fucking maps and shit? Where's the fucking gabagool?
and you make a good point. Scusate, signore. But that journey of ours explains why Italian Americans say Italian words the way they do, such as, yes, everyone's favourite, gabagool. Other examples include...
And then number 2, I got prosciutto, obviously. Number 3, I got to go with the mortadella, because I think the mortadella is making a comeback.
The gabagool.
And this is close to how these words are said in Neapolitan. Specifically, the elision of word final vowels, which are very common, famously in Italian, is a very Neapolitan feature. But also the voicing of consonants between vowels. Like we saw with the infinitive elision earlier, when that last vowel is cut off, the stress will remain on the previously the second syllable of what's now the final syllable. Like in the word...
Madonna. Whatever.
Notice how it's Maron and not Madon. That's because in Neapolitan, the D sound between vowels can become a R, that's an alveolar tap. Interestingly, the same thing happens in American English when a T sound is between vowels. So an American will say later instead of later. The accent spoken in the show is almost synonymous with Italian Americanism in the popular imagination. But it's surprising to learn that this accent is neither unique to Italian Americans, nor is its sound the result of Italian influence on the local variety of English. The dialect spoken in The Sopranos is labelled by the Atlas of North American English as New York City English. It's an immediately recognisable accent that is spoken by people local to the area in and around New York City. But like with the Cockney accent in London, whether and how strongly this accent is spoken depends on your background. So the origins of this accent are regional, rather than the result of outside influence from incomers. Of course, the NYC area is where a majority of Italian Americans live, and the only part of the USA where people of Italian ancestry make up a plurality. But the tie between the accent and Italian Americans is geographical, rather than ethnic. James Gandolfini and many of the Italian American actors that worked on the show do not themselves speak with the accent that their characters do.
I mean, I have a little bit of a temper, but it's, a useless temper. Doesn't accomplish anything generally. It's just a lot of ranting and raving and nothing. But so David probably saw that and put it into the character.
Just like back in the old country, the soprano accent and its slang is full of sociolinguistic connotations, being perhaps even more strongly associated with the mob, in no small part thanks to media like The Sopranos. After all, we shouldn't see the Sopranos in a vacuum from its own linguistic context. As a piece of media, it's been very influential not just on how people speak, but also on the sociolinguistics of the people that speak with its particular accent. William Leibov and other prominent linguists have investigated how this particular way of speaking has negative and lower class associations for many, and that it marks one out as having an ethnic white background. Increasingly in the USA, the researchers claim, people wish to distance themselves from such associations. The same can be seen in the show. Anthony Jr. and his sister Meadow both speak with very standard accents that do not reflect their ethnic background whatsoever. Once again, for social and economic reasons, whether consciously or not, we see the descendants of these dialect-speaking Italian immigrants assimilate to a broader and less identifiable way of speaking. In one sense, this is a story as old as language itself. I mean, Latin was not always the native language of Naples, after all.
Well, the Greeks were here, way before the Romans. And before the Greeks, there were somebody else. And before them, somebody else. E così via.
Certain features of the New York City accent, such as th stopping and the pronouncing of t and d dentally, likely do originate from the languages of immigrant communities. But the key distinguishing features of the accent are shared by working-class people of European descent from all ethnic backgrounds in the New York City area. Especially from my outside perspective, this accent seems completely tied to Italian-American identity. It's hard to separate the two at some point, even though the connection only goes so far. Italians that I have known who were raised in England have told me how English, as the language that they have always used among their friends, is the one that they feel more able to express certain things in. As generations lived their whole lives in America and engaged in the ethnic nexus of New York City life, the English that they spoke took on a life of its own. That in itself is something incredibly rich and something that has captured the imagination of people across the world for over 20 years now. Along with much of my own generation, I properly discovered The Sopranos during the pandemic era, and we loved it in part for its distinct voice. From jokes among my own friends to internet-wide memes, a whole ocean away from the States and precisely one France away from Italy, it still sticks in our minds as so full of character. It would be nice to be able to say that soprano English was like the regional Italian that is spoken back in Naples, an accent imprinted on by the old tongue, but it simply isn't the case. What we find in the linguistics of The Sopranos is not a straightforward story of Italian influence on a variety of English, but in many ways a story of a group of people losing touch with their linguistic roots, while developing something of their own. It's fitting that the accent that is so symbolic of Italian Americans is itself an American product, that linguistically, besides loanwords, has little influence at all from Italian, Neapolitan, or any other language than English. I'll be careful not to make too many pronouncements about the Italian-American experience, given my complete lack of connection to it. I'll only try and point out what the show itself says, and how language fits in. Italy occupies a fascinating place in the world of The Sopranos, and David Chase communicates a great deal symbolically with it.
You were having hallucinations of that Isabella figure? The protective, loving mother?
And there is a place in the corner of the La Piazza. It's a wine bar. You can sit, you can see the hills. And when it's spring, you can smell the blossom from the lemon tree. And there is a church with a bell. And they say, when it rings, that means that a baby was conceived in the town. È un posto pacifico e tranquillo, dove il tempo sembra essersi fermato. Anche la vita va avanti lentamente, non come le grandi città. Sai che la mamma ti vuole tanto bene, Antonio? Tu sei l'amore di mamma, vero Antonio? Tony? Tony?
Italy is inevitably tangled up with all of these notions. Like the loving mother, it is something else that Tony lacks and yearns for.
So how the fuck was it? Fabulous. I felt right at home.
It's great.
They're real good business-wise. I feel sorry for anyone who hasn't been, especially any Italian.
Someday.
Paulie insists that he felt right at home in Naples, despite being derided as uncultured by those he'd consider his family. And then he's seen to grin wistfully at the industrial New Jersey landscape upon his return. Whether he admits it or not, he was a fish out of water in Italy, and feels at home in the New World. His way of speaking, as a part of his whole way of being, speaks to that story.
Excuse me, let me tell you something. When America opened the floodgates and let all us Italians in, what do you think they were doing it for? Because they were trying to save us from poverty? No, they did it because they needed us. They needed us to build their cities and dig their subways and to make them richer. The Carnegies and the Rockefellers, they needed worker bees, and there we were. But some of us didn't want to swarm around their hive and lose who we were. We wanted to stay Italian and preserve the things that meant something to us: honor and family and loyalty. And some of us wanted a piece of the action.
That hive, that economic whirlwind that pulled so many in from so many places, forced those who came to assimilate, and, at least in part, to lose a connection with their home. The Sopranos depicts a people who have grown apart from their homeland, and are stranded in its echoes.